I hope the video is okay.
Hello.
A very good morning to all the participants and all the esteemed speakers of this seminar. Today, I welcome here to the day 2 of this webinar, which is titled Navigating the New Normal Amidst the Pandemic, Literary Perspective. So on the day 1 of the webinar, we talked about various ways in which literature can help us heal, where there were so many esteemed guests who joined us from various different universities and from our own university, Bihar University, and we got to know about their various views, and we probed into how spirituality can also be a mode and medium to fight or battle or combat the present pressure that we all are facing during these corona times. And we had yesterday our PG head Paul sir with us, and he talked about how Ramayana can be re-looked into in these times. And we had Purva Gulati ma'am from Delhi Technological University who talked about the effect and the importance of Mahabharata in these times and its relevance and the preachings of Lord Krishna. And in this way, there were other speakers like Dr. Purnima who talked about how books can be a healer, and it can help you heal your all the mental pressures that you are facing. We had Dr. Mamta Rani ma'am from from RBBM College, who is the present principal of RBBM College. She also talked about various books that she has been reading and how these books have a different kind of influence on us all. So it was a very informative session yesterday on the day 1 of the session, and today we proceed on to the day 2. And according to the schedule, in our first technical session today, we have two esteemed speakers. One is Dr. Soumya Sarkar from Nitishwar College, BRA Bihar University, and another one is Priyam Francis ma'am from MDDM College. Both are assistant professor in English, and I welcome both the speakers. Plus, in the second session, which we have also kept as our valedictory session, we have Dr. Rashmi Jan ma'am with us, who is from University of Allahabad, and we look forward to all their beautiful words of wisdom that we are going to listen to today. And in that way, only in valedictory session, we'll have Dr. Lalit Prabha ma'am with us, who is assistant professor in English in MSKB College here, and she is also the joint convener of this webinar. So she will be delivering the final reportee of whatever has happened and whatever we have learned about in these 2 days of the webinar. So formally, I welcome all the participants. I can see here in the chat box, there are so many participants from Kashmir, from University of Punjab and various other places. So I welcome all of you. And let's begin with our first speaker today, who is Swami Sarkar sir. So I would now ask and request him to start up with his lecture. And we are looking forward to your words of wisdom, sir. So please, I welcome Swami Sarkar sir from Niteshwar College, who is an assistant professor there from BRA Bihar University. Please, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. It's been a pleasure to be invited for delivering a lecture. It's a great pleasure for me to share my experience and
Hello, sir. Excuse me, sir. We cannot listen to you. I think your mic is muted.
oh, sorry.
Yes.
Can I start?
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Now it's audible.
Okay, so uh, I was talking about that my topic is pandemic discourse in the movie Contagion. The movie came the movie came out in the year 2011, and now it seems prophetic that whatever the movie had portrayed, if you look at the movie, you will find that the same things are happening. But before I start, I would like to start with a short story, you can say. It's about a black swan. Now, in generally, we don't see a black swan or haven't seen. I think most of us haven't seen a black swan. Uh, so the term is based on an ancient saying that presumed that black swans did not exist until in 1697 Dutch explorers saw them in Western Australia. And it is now used to connote the idea that a perceived impossibility might later be disproven. I would link it with COVID later on. So, in his best-selling book, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, a statistician by profession, he wrote a book called The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable in 2007, where he regards all the major scientific discoveries, historical events, and artistic accomplishments as black swan moments. They are undirected and they cannot be predicted. They are very unpredictable. Examples of black swan in recent times can be said to be the rise of internet, the PC, personal computer, World War One, dissolution or disintegration of the USSR, and also the 9/11 terror attacks. So, according to Taleb, the black swan has three properties. They are rarity, they are rare, extreme impact, they will have a big impact, and people will try to do a retrospective predictability that, okay, it could have been predicted. So, is COVID a black swan moment? Now, when I first heard or thought of a black swan, I thought that COVID was also a black swan because it's rare. It happened in 100 years, like they said that Spanish flu happened in 1918, and then it happened just about 100 years afterwards. But is it so? So people claimed that it was a black swan, so we don't have a plan. So there's an excuse for this that we don't know. But Taleb himself refutes such claims and declares that COVID is a white swan that is in your face, in front of you. And he says that such a global pandemic, the corona, is a white swan, something that would eventually take place with great certainty. Such acute pandemic is unavoidable. It will always happen. The result of the structure of our modern world and its economic consequences would be compounded because of the increased connectivity and over optimization. Now, these are technical terms, but plain and simple that it was going to happen. Uh, Take the case of SARS or Nipah or Ebola. They became epidemics but didn't take the form of a pandemic. So we were lucky at that time, but not so with the COVID. Interestingly, Taleb also tells that Singapore was already prepared for a pandemic since 2010. So this is a small story of Black Swan. Now, uh, returning to my topic, before I explain the terms or technicalities, uh, pandemic. So before pandemic, we should know outbreak. What is an outbreak? Because generally, what happens when a disease bursts on the scene? It's called an outbreak. So outbreak is a sudden rise in the incidence of a disease, and pandemic can be said or defined as an outbreak of a disease that occurs over a wide geographical area. We can see it's everywhere now. No one is, I think only Antarctica or some such places, there is no COVID. And it affects an exceptionally high proportion of the population. That's also with COVID. Now, epidemic is also a term that is used likewise, or you can say that pandemic is a global or a big epidemic. And there is also another term related to it, that's endemic. Now, endemic is a disease that is regularly found in a particular place or among a particular group of people and is difficult to get rid of, like malaria. It's very much in India or in Africa. We found it regularly. There's no cure kind of a thing. It's in the system kind of permanently. Now, discourse, I have used this as a vocab or like something, but discourse has got many meanings. Now there are different schools of criticism like discourse analysis and like that. But I have used the term simply as a formal treatment of a subject in speech or writing, or any connected piece of speech or writing in its social context or verbal communication conversation. Then another term which comes with pandemic is contagious. The movie's name is Contagion now, and its form is adjective form is contagious, which is transmissible by direct or indirect contact with an infected person. Now, similar word is also infectious, that is producing or capable of producing infection. The difference between the two lies that the contagious is infectious, but not vice versa. Say, for example, someone has got food poisoning, but he cannot spread it to a person. He will be infectious, but he cannot spread it. But COVID is both. It's infectious and contagious because it's also spreads. So these are a few technical terms that I would like to have discussed uh, early before starting the normal reading of the paper. So there have been a number of movies made in Hollywood on pandemic, such as Outbreak, it came out in 1995, Careers 2009, Flu 2013. There have been all others like those zombie genre or zombie movies, World War Z and all that, where a virus comes and infects people, they become like zombies, but we are not dealing with that. Contagion is more of a dystopian kind of a take, but since vaccine arrives in the movie, so it has got a happy ending. We will discuss it afterwards. But what separates Contagion from others or other movies is its technical or scientific accuracy, as well as the societal behavior depiction. It's very important because normally movies will portray that there is some kind of a virus and people are panicking and all that stuff. But this movie goes deeper than that. We will come to that. The movie is prophetic, I had already said, and anticipated the situation that would occur if such a global epidemic occurs. Mind it, the movie was made in 2011. At that point, there was no global pandemic as such anywhere or recorded, or no movies have been made since Spanish flu was in 1918. So this movie delves deep into that aspect, that if pandemic occurs, then what will happen? like quarantine zones and all that stuff. So the movie is directed by Stephen Soderbergh and it has a stellar cast: Gwyneth Paltrow, Matt Damon. Those who watch Hollywood movies will recognize the names: Kate Winslet, um, Titanic, okay, Marion Cotillard. She was the she is also a famous heroine. She was in Inception, uh, and Jude Law and Lawrence Fishburne of Matrix fame. And it has a multi-narrative framework. Now, the story is narrated through many characters, and the movie is taken forward with it. And the film's ending, or the origin of the virus, how it comes at last. So we are keep guessing that how the virus came. In the movie, all sort of epidemiologists and other people try to find out the source, but they couldn't find out. But the movie has to show it, so they show the part uh, at the last. So the film begins with patient zero. Patient zero is the person who is first identified to become infected with the illness in an outbreak. Now, here the name of the virus is MEV1, like ours, or this virus is known as COVID-19 or SARS, Corona 2, many names. So here in the movie, it's known, it's called COVID, sorry, it has become a habit of saying COVID always. So, pardon me. So it's MEV1. Now, she contracts the MEV virus in Hong Kong and brings it to USA. Sounds familiar because in COVID case too, nearly the same thing happens, that from Wuhan, it starts in China and then it spread everywhere. Now, she is also a super spreader since nobody knew that she had the virus. So she spread it far and wide. Before being diagnosed or being taken ill, she had spread it in many ways. A super spreader is an individual who is highly contagious and capable of transmitting a communicable disease to an unusually large number of people. Say, for example, uh, Gupchup wala or a Bhel Puri wala, how many people he can infect. So, because they come with a large number of people, they deal with a large number of people on a day. So, the number could be huge, sorry, if such an occurrence happens. Now, the virus is shown to spread very quickly as its R naught factor is very high. The R naught factor in epidemiology is the basic reproduction rate or number or ratio. It tells us the average number of people who will contract a contagious disease from one person with that disease. And this number is pretty high. Now, since it's a movie, the virus has to be very deadly. Normally, if a virus is very deadly like Nipah, it spreads very less, but its mortality rate is pretty high, 60-70%. But say a SARS or COVID, with COVID, the mortality rate is not that much high, but it spreads very fast. So in a movie, to give a big impact, they have joined both the factors. And maybe in future such a virus could happen. So this virus spreads very quickly as its R naught factor is very high, and it infects people very quickly, and people are uh, dying very quickly also. Means its rate of infection or spread is also pretty much on the higher side. The government, the US government, says the film is based on that, and the WHO swing into action quickly in the movie, and a race against time starts. The race for the vaccine. So a team of epidemiologists, epidemiology is the scientific study of the spread and control of diseases. They develop a vaccine very quickly. So in a movie, you have to do it quickly. It's not real world. So vaccine is actually a biological preparation that provides active acquired immunity to a particular infectious disease. Uh, Actually, you can say that a vaccine is, they take a virus and they try to, you can say, lower its power and give it in doses so that the body's immune gets adapted to it, kind of like that. It's very technical. I don't know that much. So they develop the vaccine in 130 days of the pandemic. When it starts in 133 days, against a race of time and against all that, they develop the vaccine. But we are still waiting for it. It's like waiting for Godot, the Beckett drama, that we are just waiting and waiting. We even don't know if the vaccine will arrive or not, or maybe will not arrive at all. Nobody knows. It's just the waiting game is going on. The waiting is important. So we are also waiting. And vaccine in reality takes a lot of time to make. It's not that they go to a lab and they pour some chemicals and lo and behold, the vaccine is there. It's not like that. It's a very long, complicated process. So some viruses, we know they still haven't, we don't have the virus, sorry, the vaccine still, like HIV, flu, there are many. We don't have the medicine, the vaccine for it. So maybe corona is also going that way. Or there is a term called herd immunity, though in the movie it's not shown, but it's also a pandemic term, you can say, that herd immunity, that slowly the disease will spread and everybody will get infected and the disease will slowly die out, but taking a lot of death toll with it. Now, since the movie shows that they have made the vaccine, so how will they distribute it? Because it's a large number of people. No, if the whole population is infected, so it's in crores. So how will they distribute it? Because the amount of vaccine is, what you can say, it cannot be manufactured uh, on a large number at once. So the first batch comes. What they do a kind of a lottery. Maybe with Corona also we will see in the future. Let's see how much prophetic this also, if this also becomes a prophetic thing. Because in the movie they take a lottery of a date, say 20th June, and all the people of that born on that date will be given that vaccine first, and next date will again be taken out, and this process will go as long as the amount of the production of virus, sorry, the vaccine is not in a large amount in bulk. So they will do this process. Now in the movie also there are many hypotheses on uh, the virus, how it came. They, uh, in a scene, they are talking about how the molecules are, or the virus is, which strain is there, or what. Is it biological, or is it, sorry, or man-made, lab-generated? So many theories are shown, and in the end, the move, we the audience are witnessed how the virus came. It came from a bat who was eating a, I think it was a green banana, and there was some clearance, some I think JCB or something, which was which destroyed that tree, and the bat went to a pig slaughterhouse, dropped that banana from his mouth. The pig ate it, and from it the pig came to a slaughterhouse, and the mm, the the cook who was what you can say, preparing the dish from the pig, he shook the hands with Gwyneth Paltrow, and from there she got the virus. This is known as zoonotic. That is a type of disease that passes from an animal or an insect to a human. Now, Nipah virus came like this. It came. Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry, I went somewhere else. Uh, in the movie, it's like that, and also in case of COVID, though many theories are going on in the case of COVID also, that the origin of it is lab manufactured. Trump said it's a Chinese virus, and so on and so forth. They are going on and on. But one theory resembles the movies. That is that it came from the bat to pangolin and then to uh, humans. So it's the prevalent theory. You can say that. Now, the movie also depicts the efforts and sacrifices that the health officials during a pandemic uh, they they have to sacrifice so many things. We can also see in news and all, they are showing doctors are getting infected, or unfortunately they die, and so on. So in the movie, it's portrayed by the character of Kate Winslet, and she plays the role of an officer of epidemic intelligence service. She dies in the line of the duty due to the virus, and she is the one who is defining the terms like R naught and fomites. Now, another term which is used or shown in the movie is fomites. Now, fomites is why we have to wear these gloves or masks and sanitizer. We have to sanitize the objects because fomites are an object. It can be a dish, doorknob, almirah, anything that can be contaminated with the infectious organism and serve in their transmission. Because whenever we touch some, if an infected person touches a, say, a handle or a chair or anything, uh, or a mobile even, so when it touches it, the virus remains there for 8 hours, 10 hours, something like that. So another person who touches it, so the virus goes into his hand or anywhere, and then it can be transmitted. So many health workers or doctors, epidemiologists have lost their lives. It was in the case of COVID-19, it was Li Wen Liang who identified the at first that there was something virus or a novel coronavirus, and he died. We know how China handled it. I won't go into the politics of that. And it was also the case with Carlo Urbani, who identified SARS in 2003, and he also died. Now, an interesting case in the movie is the role of Matt Damon. Now, he is the husband of patient zero, Gwyneth Paltrow, but he is naturally immune to the virus. Now, in case of corona, also many people will have like that. Some will be what we say asymptomatic. There are no symptoms in him of the virus, him or her. Sorry. So the virus may live in his body and won't do anything to him. So Matt Damon. So in this movie, you can say that he is the everyman or he is the hero. But since in multi narratives there are many narratives going on, so it's very difficult to categorize that who is what. But plays the role of that, and he is immune, but he fears that his daughter won't be. So he quarantines her. Now, um, both the term virus that we now use was not earlier, it was not like that. Now we use virus in the sense of a computer virus. Now, that is very recent in historical terms. And earlier, we know that a virus, of what I remember of the biology, I have forgotten, but it's like a living and a non-living. It's a borderline case, I can say that it's non-living unless it gets a host or a body. Now, if COVID virus is on this desk, it won't show a symptom of a living thing. But just as it gets into the system on a host or a body, it starts to replicate. Now, there are many technical terms, RNA removes and goes on. Well, my biology is poor. That's why I have studied English. Jokes apart. So earlier virus meant had various meanings like a venom emitted by a poisonous animal and even a morbid corrupting quality in intellectual or moral conditions. So it's a very old word. Now quarantine, this word has been used and now it has become what you can say, it's a very popular word, a hip word. So he quarantines his daughter so that he can save her, which we are also doing. So quarantine in general is a restraint upon activities or communication of persons or transport of goods designed to prevent the spread of disease or pests. Now a related word is self-quarantine. Now it's clear that quarantine, and if you quarantine yourself and you keep yourself away from people, also from family members, because if you are infected you can give the disease to your near and dear ones. So the related word is self quarantine. Now the etymology of the word is pretty interesting. It's a Latin word called quadragita, meaning 40. So why 40? It's very interesting why it's 40. So it was a 40-day period during which a widow was permitted by law to remain in her deceased husband's principal home without having to pay rent to his heirs. Now इट्स अ काइंड ऑफ कि हाँ 40 दिन दे देते हैं, आप फिर अपना व्यवस्था देखिए. So a period of, and it also means a period of 40 days set aside for penance or fasting. So from there the word comes quarantine, that you just isolate yourself. Now isolation is also very let me see, sorry. Isolation is also a very interesting word because it came from Latin word insula, which means island. Now how it came to, now it's used as isolation word and like that. The first hospitals were built in Italy to protect the general population from the sick in the 14th century, were located on an island. So from there the word came. Now we have taken the general terminologies or the technical terminologies of related to a pandemic or disease. Now let's see a few words which relate to society, or how a society is affected when a pandemic occurs. What happens? No. So a few social disruptions that the movie brilliantly evokes are mass hysteria. It's very common. No, अब क्या होगा, हम लोग सब मर जाएंगे, and all that stuff. People are all going crazy. It happens everywhere. It's a basic human psychology. And then it's panic buying. Panic buying. Well, maybe I also have done the same crime of kind of panic buying rations for 3 months so that if something happens, I will survive. So panic buying is also shown, or during COVID, it was very clear in US and also other countries. There was a panic buying of toilet papers. Now people were stacking toilet papers, so there was no toilet paper left in the malls. So, or there was long lines for people outside the malls, kilometers. The lines were kilometers long. So panic buying happens. Loot, arson, these are very common. Then again, though the movie didn't show the angle of people who are unemployed or they haven't got any, so how will they buy? So loot, arson, and all such stuff will occur. No one can stop it. Normally it happens, so in a pandemic or such a situation, crisis, it will occur. Also, the sealing of borders. The In the movie, Matt Damon wants to go to another state or city, and the military has blocked the roads that you cannot go. We Many videos were also there uh, of Wuhan, where Wuhan has been locked. The bridge has been totally what you can say obstructed, so that nobody from Wuhan can go to other place. And there was also some videos like um, sealing of homes also, that they were just putting uh, sealing the doors of the houses. I don't know how much true it was, because it's a world of fake news. So whom to rely and not, it's very different to distinguish. It's it's very difficult. So then there, and also mass graves. Mass graves are shown in the movie, which we have witnessed in Italy and also in USA. They are just, it's just too much. It's very sad. So I don't want to to detail how the mass graves were made and all that stuff. So, huh. One interesting thing in the movie that has been shown is the fake news or this stuff, because in 2011 blogging or fake news, they were not so much in ascendancy, which they are now. So in that manner also, the movie takes a new dimension. So in the movie, the fake news and misinformation that are spread by miscreants and all sort of people is represented by Jude Law. He is a blogger named Alan Crumvier. So, and he is also a conspiracy theorist. So he spreads fake news and all that stuff, that the vaccine is not okay, or people may die of the vaccine, they will develop uh, some problems because of the vaccine and all sort of things. Now he spreads a rumor or a fake news that forsythia, it's a homeopathic medicine, can cure MEV1. So what he does is he develops or shows the symptoms to people on internet, that he has developed the symptoms of MEV1 and forsythia cures it. Now what happens afterwards is what will happen everywhere if something like that happens. So people are going to the shops buying forsythia, and the shop owner says that only 60 pieces are left or 60 bottles are left. So everybody, then the line breaks up. Even in a developed country, if there is a panic, there won't be any line or queue. It will be always be like that. So jiski lathi uski bhais. So it sounds familiar. It has happened with corona also. We can see it. There's a guy in US called Alex Jones, who is selling a silver solution, claiming that it can cure corona. Okay, very good. Some homeopathy guys are also giving drops, that you take these 3 drops for 3 days. I have also taken it. So you take it for 3 days, and you will be cured of corona. In India too, it's going on like that. Recently, a medicine was launched, Ayurvedic medicine, that claimed that it can treat corona, but we know what will happen. So these kind of things go on, and they won't. They are just like same everywhere in the world. Wherever you go, it's the same in a pandemic. So the movie as we can see, or as I have told, has a very relevant discourse in context of also the actual name of corona, that is SARS coronavirus 2 era. Now, SARS also came, I think it's 2003 or 4. It's severe acute respiratory syndrome. The same thing happens in corona also. In corona, the syndrome, uh, the what you can say, the symptoms are the same. That there's a problem of breathing. So severe, it's very severe. Acute respiratory syndrome. Your respiratory organs start to fail, or they are under a very, they can't take oxygen. So that's why first oxygen is given, or then ventilator, so that the mucus or the substances which have been formed in the lungs could be taken out. Now, corona is also an interesting name. This is not the first coronavirus. So people call it novel coronavirus. So it's a new variation. Naya wala hai. So it's corona actually means crown in Spanish. There is also a beer. Sorry, there's also a beer named Corona, and I think its sales has dropped down significantly after the coronavirus, because people thought that okay, they will drink this and they will get corona. So corona means crown in Spanish. The shape of this virus is like that. It has got protein spikes, which makes it like a Taj, the crown. So it's called Corona. Well, I think I have spoken much, and thank you for listening me and giving me this opportunity. I again thank the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. You gave us a detailed view on what was there in this movie, Contagion, and how it is related to our present times. And rightly, you said out that, okay, when is that eureka moment going to come, when then finally, okay, we have found out the vaccine. So we are waiting for that, really, and desperately, actually. And right, it's just like the situation of waiting for Godot. We are waiting for the
Waiting for
medicine
the
or the
vaccine.
vaccine, but it's not there. So till that time, we have to wait, obviously. And we have some questions here.
Okay.
There are two questions which I can see here. One is from Dr. Santosh Kumar, and he's asking, sir, how do you see this pandemic from literary perspective? How to connect the situation to literature?
Uh, I think many people have spoken about it on this, how pandemic is. Actually, we have to look at from, if you look at it from a literary perspective, then you should then see what other people have written earlier. No, Camus in Plague, uh, or even Gabriel Garcia Marquez in Love in the Times of Cholera. They have dealt it in different ways, different manners. Uh, what is a movie actually? Movie is also a literary piece, a work of art. Film studies are now very popular. So it's also a work of art. So they have shown that what will happen if such a situation arises, and they have the hats off to the director of the movie, that they have pinpointed it, that what will occur if such a pandemic or such a situation happens. So
Thank you, sir. Very well said that film studies is also a genre of literature. So when you are talking about any film or any other piece of literature, you are talking about literature as a whole.
literature, society,
Yes, and
it's that because a movie portrays what is going on in the society. No,
yes,
not even movies, even songs. The kind of songs that are being written right now shows the condition of the people and the mindset.
sure. And Sir has also talked about apocalyptic fiction and dystopia and other such
Yeah,
genres. So there also such things have been written. And one thing that just clicked my mind, that it is two lines from a Hindi poem which says, "वियोगी होगा पहला कवि, आह से उपजा होगा गान, उमरकर आंखों से चुपचाप, वही होगी कविता अनजान." So obviously, the present
lovely lines.
situation that we are dealing with somewhere or the other, that is reflected in maybe films, through poetry, through whatever other genres that are being written. So thank you so much, sir, for this well illuminating lecture. And next in line, we have Priyam Francis ma'am from MDDM College, and she is from BRA Bihar University. And now I would like to call upon ma'am for our next speaker. So please, ma'am, we request you to start up. Okay, I'll unmute you.
Thank you, Vinamrata ma'am, for unmuting me and including me in this webinar. And I am grateful to the organizers for inviting me as a speaker here. I hope I'm audible and visible. Is there some problem? I think the video and audio both
Yes,
are
ma'am.
switched.
All
Okay,
is fine.
okay. Because I thought I wasn't visible enough. Audible. So, greetings to everyone. And I am Priyam Francis, Assistant Professor in the Department of English, MPDM College, BR Ambedkar Bihar University. It was a very engaging lecture which Sir just delivered, and we talked about COVID being a white swan and zoonotic diseases being something avoidable. So kind of it boils down to how we perceive the threats that we are facing today and how what we have done in the past to avoid them. Clearly, we have not done much because we had many you know kind of there were other zoonotic diseases which were there, Nipah, SARS, MERS, and we clearly ignored all of those indications that nature was giving us. And here we are facing this pandemic. So, if we take a broad perspective of literature, we kind of create stories every day. And the way we live today becomes a part of literature, a part of historical, anthropological records tomorrow. And the pandemic has brought many of our mistakes to the fore, how we live our lives, how we have what we have done up till now. It has also brought to attention the kind of inequity that is in society, because there are certain sections uh, which are facing, which are suffering more during this pandemic. So and also uh, we have ignored nature. There are many mistakes that have come to the fore, and how receptive are we? How are we really working on these mistakes? Are we really working or not? So my paper will try to focus on what kind of work are we doing to change the status quo. How is the status quo, that is the existing state of affairs, how is that faring during this pandemic? And that is the title of my paper, Status Quo and the Pandemic. So we all know how the COVID strain of the coronavirus family, which is currently holding the whole world hostage, has proven to be one of the most deadly viruses to afflict humans in recent history. And post the onset of the pandemic, the functioning of the entire world has been affected and almost upended. The mobility and consumption, which are markers of vibrant economies, have taken a backseat to the primary need for survival. And various survivalistic techniques are covered by Sir in his talk. So the normal as we know it has been interrupted, and according to many people, on a permanent basis, meaning that possibly this disease, and such other diseases are here to stay. While with time we will probably come up with curative medicines and preventive vaccination, the kind of fatality that this pandemic has wrought across the globe will not be effaced as easily with a cure. Uh, I hope I am audible to everyone. Should I use earphones?
It's fine, ma'am. You're quite audible.
Thank you. So, there will be there will be solutions which come up, but how do we not know that nature will come up with newer viruses, which we are not able to find an immediate cure to? So, while with time we will probably come up with curative medicines, preventive vaccinations, the kind of fatality that this pandemic has wrought across the globe will not be effaced as easily with a cure. And yet, even while the pandemic is still claiming numerous lives every day, we have begun to talk about a new normal. The word in itself is, it seems inappropriate in the context of a deadly virus and its escalating death toll, and yet it is increasingly being used. Dr. Dinesh Kumar, an associate professor in a Mumbai college, in a recent webinar, he commented upon how people have, demonized, rationalized, philosophized, aestheticized the virus and its effects. So probably, life, because it has to go on. So that's one of the reasons why we are trying to normalize. But it's not an unqualified optimism, because we are talking about a new normal, which is indicative of the fact that we hardly believe that we will be rid of this disease this in a jiffy, or that we will make a comprehensive return to how things used to be. And we know that we will have to learn to adjust our lives around the highly infectious and dangerous disease. Meanwhile, as we try to come to terms with the pandemic, there are other associated repercussions as well, which might not be as visible in comparison to the obvious loss of lives. The virus, which works at the cellular level, has been fateful for the macro level institutions and functioning of the world in general as well, whether that be at the level of the family or the nation or even the globe. There have been reports from all corners of the world about various governments which have become more assertive in the wake of the present exigency. Under the garb of pandemic or epidemic laws, there have been conscious and consistent attempts to wrest more power on the part of various political leaders. How will this pandemic, seeing as it has so many allied repercussions, modify our world, whether it will dismantle the global or social status quo in various spheres or help redefine and strengthen them, are crucial questions aligned to the handiwork of this virus. Let's first take a look at the meaning of the term status quo. Dictionary app I have on my phone defines the term status quo as the existing state of affairs. Its synonyms have been marked out as normalcy or normality. And since we are investigating normalcy anyway, it does seem to be an aligned interest. Etymologically, it's a Latin phrase meaning the existing state of affairs, particularly with regard to social or political issues. In the sociological sense, it generally applies to maintaining or changing existing social structure and or value. What I believe and what is generally accepted is that intrinsic to the concept of societies or civilizations is the concept of order and system. Chaos, disorder, or any threat to order appears counterintuitive to our collective psyche usually, and also to our lived experience. Hence, any modification in the normal, the usual, and the pre existing state of affairs is not really something that, uh, sorry, okay, I'm sorry for that interruption. So, yeah. So, any modification in the normal, the usual, or the pre existing state of affairs is not really something that is welcome. Nobody really thinks that they have it easy. And beset as all of us are in our individual lives, we are beset with our individual existential dilemmas, and the familiar seems easy, something that has been set in stone, something that we don't need to bother about. And yet, most of the systems, institutions that we have devised the world over are mostly hierarchical and unequal, mainly for probably for the sake of system or establishing an external system. But that means that what could be familiar and reassuring for one person could be constrictive or even abusive for someone else, especially on one on whose exploitation the pre-existing system is premised. So various civilizations and cultures have had their versions of unequal systems in place, like the Elizabethan chain of being, or the caste system, or the patriarchal system, which is a common feature across cultures. I was talking about patriarchal. So, but modifications in a system are difficult to bring since they are usually kept rigidly in place by those who benefit from it and by the means of power they have already gained from it. And usually they are also because they are couched in cultural, religious, or superstitious terminology. So it's usually in times of great social upheaval that any such change is usually effected. And the COVID-19 has indeed brought a period of great social upheaval for all of us. So, what kind of social or political changes is it precipitating or is capable of effecting is an interesting question. How do the elements which are usually bound in a status quo, there are binaries that we create, and how do the elements which are usually bound in unequal dualistic relations in a status quo, how do they interact? Will be a focus of this paper, how they are interacting at present. So one of the increasingly crucial aspects of human existence is our influence on this planet, our planet. We have maintained ruinous patterns of consumption and monopolization of nature for quite some time now. And our domination of the material world around us is a type of status quo that has run quite a long course, starting from the point where we discovered the skill of lighting fires for survival against a mainly uh, threatening, treacherous external world. Now we have come to the point where we have become geologic forces in our own right. So much so that we have a whole geologic phase of the earth named after us, namely the Anthropocene, the present one. And yet, the minuscule natural entity that the COVID-19 is, it has indeed smashed to smithereens any perception of human omnipotence in any way. Uh, Things seem to have come a full circle. The reckless human behavior has generally been snuffing the life out of various ecosystems and gradually effacing the Earth's green cover. But time and again, we have been at the receiving end of nature's whiplash. Even that, though usually, is not enough to make us sit up and take notice. Uh, as soon as the threat has passed, we usually return back to our usual ways. And this time round, though, since everybody is in lockdown and it is affecting our daily lives, we have had to take notice. And uh, the, this time around, we have, while for the, sorry. So this time round, though, we have had to take notice, while for the most part, nature's vengeance, nature's reaction, nature's the fallout of our own mistakes, all of that has usually been localized or limited to a nation or even a continent. This time round, though, we have had a threat on our hands which has the whole world in its thought, and the coronavirus crisis isn't showing signs of abating anytime soon. With the onset of the new year, the reports trickling in from China did little to indicate when I think all of us must remember how there were certain reports coming in from China that there is a certain virus and there have been a certain number of deaths. A doctor died probably. So when those initial reports came in, nobody probably had that kind of inkling on what this might snowball into. So the reports trickling in from China did little to indicate the kind of challenge in store for humankind that was in the offing. And cut to 7 months later, our lives have undergone a transformation in a way. For example, earlier we never had seminars on the web, but this is one of the positive effects, I would say, of the coronavirus crisis. So, but this situation, it has many negative impacts, and it has little hope. It seems to have little hope of amelioration, immediate amelioration. By various reports, this crisis has undone the economic gains of many years put together. And that is quite ironical because since it is indeed economic achievement and quest for global dominance that have been the driving forces behind industry and technology, leading to the depredation of Earth and its resources, the various habitats that has gradually brought us to this point. And we are in an unprecedented bind, and it's a rare position for humans to be in because the tables have been turned, the positions have been reversed. It's usually we who are busy writing the destinies of the world and its inhabitants. The sustained incremental death toll is, akin to the destruction left after a particularly ruinous war. And it is almost like nature has waged a war against our species. The various kinds of militaristic political preeminence that world powers and advanced countries have prided themselves on has also proved futile in a way uh, in the face of this crisis. And apparently, the tables have been turned on this status quo, this particular status quo. But if we look closely, we will find that the capitalist agenda that is largely responsible for this situation has continued unabated. Uh, Say, for example, if we take into consideration our own country, how we have reacted to what kind of lessons are we learning with relation to the ecology. Uh, well, it does not seem that we have taken the pandemic, the kind of warning the pandemic has provided us seriously. Because in a paper titled Environment versus Economy, uh, an approach that exposes India to COVID-19 like infections, it has been mentioned how this is general analysis of what kind of situation India is in, given its demography and given its general economic condition. India is a potential hotspot for emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases because we have a very high density of people and livestock amidst areas of high biodiversity and potentially very high rates of interaction amongst these. This is crucial because it is believed that coronavirus crisis, like other zoonotic diseases, uh, like such as Nipah, SARS, or MERS, spread from animals to humans. In this case, bats with interim interaction formed by other linked animals. An article which talks about the continuation of the hand in glove arrangement between government and capitalists mentions how environmentalists in India are criticizing government moves to continue to approve major industrial projects and to relax the nation's environmental assessment rule, even as the COVID-19 pandemic has complicated public oversight and cancelled potential field reviews. Because usually, uh, any kind of ratification to uh, projects is given on the basis of field reviews. But that kind of mobility has been hampered. But even despite that, we are not, holding back on those ratifications on allowing multinational corporations or even our own industries or companies from foraying into eco-sensitive zones, uh, ecologically rich areas. Expressing the opinion of Kanchi Kohli, an environmental governance expert with the Center for Policy Research, who criticizes the move to ratify big ticket projects without proper vetting of their sustainability, suitability, or the potential damage they might cause. The article further reads, India has been in strict lockdown, but it's been business as usual. And the words are, in a way, they are kind of, they evoke a sense of horror, because with the way the situation has changed, we should be proactive too. We should be proactive in saving our ecology, in um, taking steps to conserve it. But it's been business as usual at the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Panels there have been meeting over video conference to approve a slew of mining infrastructure and industrial projects, many of them in forest areas. In the past month, the ministry has signed off on a new coal mine in an elephant reserve. Preliminary, and I would like to bring to mind the death of the pregnant elephant. I think it caused a huge furor, but these pieces of news, where people are going to encroach on an elephant reserve, which would mean more than one elephant or calves would die. But this sort of news doesn't really create the kind of furor that it should. We are not really as aware about our environment. We are not really as proactive about conservationism as we should be. And this pandemic is kind of a wake up call, but I don't think we are ready to receive the call. Anyway, in the past month, the ministry has signed off on a new coal mine in an elephant reserve, preliminary drilling inside a wildlife sanctuary that is home to endangered lion-tailed macaws and great Indian hornbills, and a contentious project to remake New Delhi's Parliament district. And it is considering two other controversial projects: a large hydropower project in the Bang Valley. I think everyone has heard of that, and I hope that we are that aware, and a biodiversity hotspot in northeastern India, and a uranium mine in a tiger reserve in central India. So the ministry is also moving ahead with a rewrite of some of India's environmental rules. Among other changes, the draft proposes reducing the time allowed for public comments on assessments and allowing more projects to avoid the public comment process entirely. I think everyone will remember the case of the RA forest, where people had a choice, as in they at least had a voice. They could come out and protest and try to protect the trees that they value. With these changes, with these slew of changes, people will have a lesser say. There'll be a reduced visibility or uh, say of people in uh, the kind of ramifications that will have for you know our society in general. If we are not able to talk about what we should have an active interest in, that doesn't bode well for our ecological or social well-being. And we might think that it's only limited to ecology, but ultimately it will affect everything right now. Just like right now, everyone is being affected, and this has been a result of our amnesia with regards to ecology and environment. So, yeah, so critics of the proposal say proposed changes could normalize approval of projects that went ahead without environmental clearance. And this is also very dangerous, because sometimes, for example, in the oil drilling mishap that we had recently, uh, that that undertaking had probably started even before the clearance. And if specifically not in that case, but there have been cases where operations have begun even before clearances are given to them. So we will have to rise up, arise and
Yes.
awake. We'll probably end up uh, being complicit in this destruction of equality and, in a way, of our economy and society, because everything will trickle down. Yes, an oil drilling operation in Assam was given a green signal after amendment in a law which made public consultations unnecessary. And it's the same oil corporation's operation which resulted in the Bagjan oil gas leak, and which resulted in the fire and great influence, or rather great damage to people, their lives, livelihoods, and the ecologically rich area around that. There were many deaths of animals and all. And I'll develop on that. As a result of the same operation, an oil and gas well in Upper Assam's Bagjan that had been leaking for about a fortnight caught fire on June 8 or 9, 20 of this year. 4 people were injured and 50 houses burned. 2,500 families had to be evacuated. The gas well is a part of a field with 23 such drills situated close to the Dibru Saikhowa National Park. After the blowout, officials at the nearby national park recovered the carcass of a young Gangetic, Gangetic river dolphin and participants. I think they are, yeah. So, after the blowout, the officials recovered the carcass of a young dead Gangetic river dolphin and dead livestock also 2 days later on the wetland that falls under the eco-sensitive zone of the park. If floods, and this is something that a person has to say, a local has to say about the situation, because it's not just people, it's not just the animals who are being affected, it's also the people. And together we form an ecology. We keep forgetting that we are all linked. So if floods and coronavirus were not enough, this is what a local person has to say. This blast of gas has now thrown us out of our houses, damaged our crops, killed our livestock, and now no new crops will grow for a very long time. This, while the 340 square kilometer national park and biosphere is the world's only riverine island wildlife reserve. In a similar move, the National Board for Wildlife gave its nod for coal mining in the ecologically sensitive Dehing Patkai, I think I mentioned this, elephant reserve in Assam. All of this and many similar cases where our ecology is being sidelined for anthropocentric activities shows how we might not have learned our lesson. Possibly, the status quo here will remain unchanged. Moving on to the global political scenario, initially, when the disease spread, the crisis was touted to have, the potential to upend the world order in a good way. There were perceptions of the virus as an equalizer of sorts because it spread mainly in the richer countries of the north. So, when near the onset of the global outbreak, the disease spread to the richer Western countries. A WHO report informs how by mid-March 2020, the WHO European region had become the epicenter of the epidemic, reporting over 40% of globally confirmed cases. In April, 63% of the global mortality from the virus was from that region. And gradually, though, it has made a significant presence in various countries which might not boast of as much wealth or resources as these richer northern countries. So the present records reveal how the global south too has representation in the list of the worst hit COVID hit countries, as three South American countries, namely Brazil, Peru, and Chile, have made it to the top 10 on that list. And sadly, India too is inching its way to the top of the dreaded list. We are fourth, as far as I believe right now. While the interconnections in the globalized world are usually premised on mutual economic, technological, industrial requirements, these links do not abate the competitive forces at work in global politics. And we live in a scenario in which, even though physically we might be connected, there's still they still function on a primary motive of self-preservation and self-promotion. It is obviously each for their own, and logistically there might be alliances, but they too are mainly driven by self-interest. The post-COVID, post-outbreak world order seems to be poised to only reinforce the status quo. The USA, the leading superpower, has still been able to get away with snacking medicines and supplies meant for other countries. I think people must have heard about this. Meant for other countries, and it has still not lost the big Sam domineering ways, especially under the leadership of its belligerent president. Such selfish tactics may prove counterproductive in the long run. since effective tackling of the coronavirus crisis demands a more comprehensive, united approach. And piecemeal, petty, exclusive methods will not stanch the march of this pandemic in any way because ultimately we are inexorably connected thanks to globalization. Such narrow mindedness would only exacerbate and extend the crisis because the reports say that if poorer countries are unable to stop the virus, it is even more likely to re emerge in more developed parts of the world that had initially thought that they had defeated it. Yet we still see that countries which have power are using it to their more benefit in the uh, most exploitative way they can. We also saw how the American leader strong armed India into resuming its exports of the drug hydroxychloroquine to America. And this COVID phase, has failed to stand expansionist ambitions too. This is as true or even more so in the case of China. China is more or less emerging as the antagonist, as the global antagonist. So even while we are trying to come to terms with the situation brought by the pathogen and the kind of the way it has spread, many countries have blamed China for not uh, making the other countries, the whole world, aware of the kind of dangers that it could pose for everyone. So even while we are trying to come to terms with the situation brought by the pathogen, China has initiated skirmishes by advancing into the Indian side of LAC, and it has also seemingly colluded with our neighbors, like the mostly hostile Pakistan and even the relatively more benign Nepal and Bhutan, who have all assumed an aggressive stance with relation to the delineation of national boundaries. This could be part of political posturing to exhibit its clout to the international community, which has been blaming China for the spread of the disease, deadly disease. It could also simply be an opportunistic attempt at fulfilling its expansionist ambitions by striking during an obviously vulnerable period. While in international world relations, this was we were discussing politics, but in the world sphere, world arena. So while in international world relations, nations are not holding back from outrightly aggressive posturing, even on the domestic front. The power politics has been galvanized into using the pandemic as an opportunity to consolidate and grab more power than the democratic systems, governance systems would allow under normal circumstances. An article by The Wire mentions how the pandemic is fast becoming a sort of gateway to autocracy. The article, referring to a meeting of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance and Intercountry Organization, talked about how the board apprehended that the pandemic may enable and tempt democratically elected leaders to become autocrats and dictators under the garb of emergency powers. Even though democracy had been on decline globally for some time now, the public health crisis has hastened the transition to autocracy, and there are some serious doubts about the capacity of countries to effect a course correction once the threat from the virus abates. According to the data by the UN's Center for Civil and Political Rights, 84 countries have declared a state of emergency since the pandemic began. And emergency is usually equated as a preliminary step to autocracy. India has had its own brush with emergency, with the declaration of emergency, and there are examples from various countries. For instance, Hungary has extended the state of emergency indefinitely, with its prime minister allowing himself to rule by decree. And Serbia's president too has announced an open-ended state emergency, open-ended meaning an indefinite kind of emergency, sidelining parliament and enforcing some of Europe's strictest measures, while Chile has declared a state of catastrophe. The Philippine Congress has accorded emergency powers to its president to legislate. The article further points out how the declaration of emergency is not the problem per se. The prevailing situation demands such extreme measures. I think everybody would concur on that. But the worrisome aspect is the unchecked power it bestows on the head of the government, which allows her or him to push forward a repressive agenda against dissenting voices and erode democratic process that aim to hold them accountable. The accountability factor has gone down very much. And hence, countries which used to swear by the principles of democracy are increasingly seen to be gravitating towards autocratic, heedless political governance. If we take into account the usual state of affairs, the status quo with regards to governments in the domestic sphere, with any party at the helm of the whole nation, I mean, even that is something that is pre-existing, that happens all the time. That any government at the helm of a whole nation, in all possibility, does take advantage of its spell of power. But it's usually restricted because of the opposition, and also the civil society and the general public, which can question the government. But the pandemic has rendered any opposition to autocracy mainly toothless, because we cannot uh, meet, we cannot organize, we cannot galvanize people towards any sort of perceived autocracy. An article, while commenting on civil activism, talks about how government responses to the new coronavirus pandemic are disrupting civil society globally. Lockdowns and physical distancing measures are confining people to their homes and upending their ability to meet, organize, and advocate. Many civil society organizations have been forced to put planned activities on hold. Others are scrambling to shift their work online. More worryingly, illiberal leaders in a number of countries are taking advantage of the crisis to tighten their political grip by weakening checks and balances, imposing censorship, and expanding state surveillance, all, all at a time when civil society groups are less able to fight back. Such measures pose a significant threat to activism and to democracy in general. The pandemic provides a convenient cover for governments to further tilt the balance of power in their favor. If we take a look at the social inequity, moving towards the social inequity which we have in general, all of us have witnessed the plight of migrants and the poor, who have been the people worst hit by the pandemic. With no safety net and loss of jobs, they have been further impoverished. And the current state of affairs doesn't really seem to be moving towards any sort of positive change for them. Uh, while people, the richer people can, they can draw back to gated communities, they can stock up on stuff, they can stock up on essential stuff, and they can have, virtual lives. The poor are in very dire straits because they do not have access to any of this. Uh, there remains the familial sphere too, uh, which is the unit of civilizations and society. Uh, while the external situation is pretty fraught, most people are touting the pandemic as a boon of sorts, since it has provided many with quality family bonding time. That might be the case, but the generalization doesn't really hide the fact that there are many dysfunctional families out there, or a set of people who are already in shaky, brittle relationships. The lockdown, uh, it doesn't really, it's only going to test the bonds and even reveal the fault lines. Given the largely patriarchal nature of most societies and households, usually women are vulnerable to misogynistic violence, gender violence. UN has described the worldwide increase in domestic abuse as a kind of a shadow pandemic alongside COVID-19. It is thought that such cases have increased by about 20% during the lockdown. Even this, I don't think, is a definitive data, because it is probably only a partial analysis of the dire situation, since in places like India, which are still largely rural, with approximately 70% of the population being comprised of rural folk, about 86% of women who have experienced violence in their lives, they have never sought help. So we are looking at, like the UN explained, uh, and I think the situation was already bad earlier. It has been exacerbated by the pandemic, where people are forced to live in close quarters. So even a cursory look at all of these various aspects of human existence, the situation engendered doesn't really seem promising enough to ascertain any specific change in the status quo in favor of the relatively weak. In fact, it seems that the pandemic has only exacerbated, worsened the existing conditions and tilted them in favor of the powerful. The, the audience may agree or disagree with my conclusions, and I will leave this talk open ended. People can draw their own conclusions. This is what I have had to say on the pandemic and how we have reacted to it, and the lack of consider- con- uh, consideration or reaction. Thank you. Thank you all for your patient hearing.
Thank you so much, ma'am. You brought our attention to so many various different facts which were being neglected, like the environmental concerns, about the power politics of the various nations. And this reminds me of Foucault when he says that power is ubiquitous and all encompassing. So whoever is there in the power, they try to manipulate things, they try to put on their own views in the first line. So obviously it is true that we have a one very nice comment from Priyanka Francis here. She is saying that in the post-truth scenario, those in the favor of aggressive development, rubbish environmental concerns are paranoid predictions for them, and authorities at the highest level are complicit, which cannot bode well for the ecology. So ecology is a much
Larger.
much yeah, it should be given that concern which is not being given. And you brought about so many facts about how China is behaving in this in these times, and about the national level, and about the our internal struggles which the migrant laborers are facing, which the downtrodden people who are marginalized are facing. So it was like a whole net of, or a web of all the different things that we are missing till now. So you have well knitted in a very proper way, and we are really thankful for this overwhelming session. And there are no questions here actually, so that is fine. We thank you once again for your time and all. Thank you, ma'am. And with this, we'll end up our technical session, the first technical session. And now we move on to our valedictory session, where we have with us Dr. Rashmi Jain ma'am. Rashmi Jain ma'am is from Ishwar Charan College, University of Allahabad, and she has penned down many books. There are so many books to her name, and she is a prolific writer, um, a prolific writer. She has so many books to her name, and she has published her many papers, and she gave a bio to us which included so many awards which she has been bestowed about from various authorities. So I welcome here ma'am, and for the valedictory session we have Dr. Rashmi Jain ma'am with us. Please ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible to everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Dr. Vinamrita ma'am for inviting me to deliver a lecture in this webinar entitled Navigating the New Normal Amidst Pandemic Literary Perspective. And the first two lectures were quite engaging. I was listening to it. So thank you to the speakers as well. And I also extend my heartfelt thanks to the principal of the college and the organizing committee. Today, I would be talking about literature and pandemic. So I hope my lecture would be covering up all the things. Basically, literature is considered as the reflection of the society. It is also considered as the mirror of the society. So whatever phenomena are taking place in the society is reflected back in the work of art and literature. And writers over the centuries, they have been expressing themselves and they have been reflecting upon pandemics, either in form of verse or in form of prose. They have not only brought about the terrifying power of the pandemics, but they have also tried to portray the resilience of the human mind while confronting it. So we can say that literature and society are interdependent on each other, and whatever happens in the society is reflected back in the work of literature. So starting from the Antonine Plague to the plague of Justinian to the Great Bubonic Plague, in Europe, then the Spanish flu, the Asian flu, and a number of pandemics have been represented in the work of literature. And if we enumerate them, there are a lot of work in which we can find about the pandemics or the references of the pandemics, starting from the Bible to starting from the Bible. Then there is Homer, then Chaucer, Boccaccio, Shakespeare, Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year, then Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, Mary Shelley, The Last Man, Albert Camus, The Plague. There are other writers like Stephen King, The Stand, and these were the foreign writers who have reflected upon the pandemics, and there were many Indian writers as well who have made a reference to pandemics in their work, or they have written books on pandemics. So among them, we can include Suryakant Tripathi Nirala. Then there's Munshi Premchand. Then we have got Ahmed Ali's Twilight in Delhi that deals with the pandemic. Then we have got Amitabh Ghosh, Calcutta Chromosome. So there are so many works. Some of the other famous works of the foreign writers includes Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And so many works are there in which these pandemics have been referred to. I'm just remembering the words of W.B. Yeats, which seem to be quite relevant and prophetic from the second coming. He says, turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. So to begin with, I can say that we have got reference of pandemics in the Bible, and it was believed that in the Old Testament also there is a reference to plague, and it was believed that the plague it has been derived from a Latin word called plega, meaning wound, and it was believed that these pandemics were sent from God as a kind of a punishment for as a kind of punishment to human beings for their misdeeds, for their misconduct. And then we in Homer has also made reference to pandemics. He was the first one to use the term epidemios in Odyssey, and this term has also been used as a medical term in treatise to in a treatise by Hippocrates, which meant that which circulates or propagates in a country. So in Iliad also, Homer has referred to this to the pandemic, and as plague has been inflicted on the city of Troy because of the misdeed of the misconduct of Agamemnon. Then the most virulent pandemic in human history was the Black Death in 14th century, and its initial outbreak has created a devastating effect on Italy, and we can correlate it with COVID-19, as Italy is one of those nations that has been very hugely affected by COVID-19. Its effect could be seen much more on Italy apart from the other countries. And in Boccaccio's Decameron also, it provides an authentic description on pestilence in Florence. Then Boccaccio's Decameron has hugely inspired Geoffrey Chaucer. And being inspired and influenced by Boccaccio, Geoffrey Chaucer has mentioned about plague in his work, The Canterbury Tales. And he has knitted one tale which is titled as The Pardoner's Tale, in which he talks about the pandemic. Then we come to Shakespeare. Shakespeare is one of the most well-known, widely known playwrights, and there is a critic called Stephen Greenblatt. He says that Shakespeare has spent most of the time of his life under the shadow of plague, and England is one of those countries that has been frequently affected by plague. It has been there has been outbreak of plague a number of times. Either it was 1582 or 1592, 1603 or 4, then 1606, 1609 and 10. There are so many time slots during which England was being affected by plague. And Shakespeare, from his childhood to the time in which he has produced a number of works, it can be said that the time span between 1606 to 1610 can be considered as a time period or a time span in which Shakespeare has produced a number of work, and it was the most fruitful time of his career, in which he has produced works like Hamlet, King Lear, Antony and Cleopatra, The Tempest. So this will be considered as one of the most productive time, and a number of times plague has infected England. And it was believed that in 1606, the theatres were closed, and Shakespeare was quarantined, and in 1606 he produced King Lear, and there is reference to plague in King Lear, but though it has lost its specificity over time. So Lear curses his daughter Regan and her husband Cornwall, and he quotes and he says, "Vengeance, plague, death, confusion," and he berates her as a plague sore or embossed carbuncle in my corrupted blood. So we can see the influence of pandemics, that how when pandemics took place, how it gave opportunity to the writers to portray them in their works. Then there is a French critic called René Girard. So he said that the distinctiveness of plague is that it erases all kind of distinctiveness. Somebody has asked, I was watching from the beginning, somebody has asked a question also on this, that what is its relevance in literature. So this is what Rene Girard, we can find it out that epidemics or plague or through these pandemics, what they create is that they create a kind of equality among the people. So the effect of pandemic on everyone is equal. They create a kind of justice. Nobody is high or low for them. Nobody is rich or poor for them. Nobody is young or old for them. So pandemic creates, and rather it treats everyone equally with a sense of justice. So very truly, Rene Girard has said that the distinctiveness of these pandemics is that they erase all kind of distinctiveness. So all kind of social, political, cultural, personal differences or demarcation are erased. Then we also have Daniel Defoe, who has written a work called A Journal of the Plague, in which he has dealt with the pandemic plague. And while we read it, we find that it is quite heart-rending. He has explored a deplorable plight of the victims and their condition, that how they suffer, and it is very heart-rending when we read it. When he has discussed the symptoms that the patients, the victims, they suffer from high fever, they suffer from vomiting, they are highly in pain, they have got insufferable headaches, they have got pain in backs, they have got pain in joints, they were swelling in their body, they suffer from tumors, and And another person who is not suffering from this disease cannot do anything apart from just standing on one corner and just watching the sufferer in pain. They cannot do anything apart from that, because there is no cure for pandemics generally. So they cannot do anything, and they have to watch the sufferer in pain. Then we also have got Mary Shelley, who has written a novel entitled The Last Man. It is an apocalyptic novel, and it's a futuristic tale of a love affair, and it also tells about the gradual extermination of human population because of the pandemic, that is plague, in this particular novel. And as I told you that this is a futuristic novel. The novel has its setting in 21st century. We are living in 21st century, and we are living in 2020. As Eliot said that April is the cruelest month, I feel like saying that 2020 is the cruelest year. And in this particular novel, Mary Shelley, she has used a setting of 21st century. The novel begins in 2073 and it ends in 2100. So we are still living in 2020. So it's quite futuristic. And we find that one character, Raymond, he enters into the city and he finds that the city is completely isolated and deserted. And suddenly there is an explosion, and he dies in that explosion. Then the novel shifts to the time span of 2092, where we find that the protagonist, Lionel, we find that he has crossed across the borders, the shores of Ramina Island, and he has swam across alone, and we find that he is the only person who is surviving on that particular planet. That is why the novel is entitled as The Last Man. And we also find that he does not have anyone to have friendship with. So therefore, he develops a friendship with a sheepdog. So it also tells about the isolation, the alienation people are suffering during the time of pandemic, and what kind of mental trauma they go through during these pandemics. And the story ends in the year 2100. Then we also have another novel by Albert Camus that was published in 1947, which was titled as The Plague. So in this particular novel, Albert Camus deals with the pandemic of bubonic plague in the town of Oran, a coastal area in North Africa, where thousands of rats have died unnoticed by the populace. And the government is not at all looking towards this particular problem. And when they arise from their sleep, and when they find that this particular death of rats is creating problem, at that time it is too late. So the rats have started dying on the streets, and what the government has done is that they started collecting it into a particular place. Instead of burying them instantly, they have started collecting it in one place, and this became the cause of the spread of this disease, and it became a pandemic. So the protagonist is Dr. Bernard Rex, and we find that he has lost a number of his near and dear ones because of this pandemic. His friend, his confidant, Mr. Michael, dies because of this bubonic plague, this pandemic. Then his wife also suffers from the bubonic plague, and he has lost a number of people who were associated with him. But what is more important over here is that the situations which Albert Camus, because Albert Camus is an absurdist, he's an absurdist dramatist. So what he expresses that is quite relatable in the present scenario of the COVID-19, when he discusses the situation created in the city of Oran. That is quite similar to the present time situations when he says that when the death tolls have begun to rise, we find that the people have been quarantined and burials were given specific or strict supervision. Then the town was sealed off. The gates of the cities were closed. Then the rail traveling was prohibited. The mails were suspended. Importance was given to social separation, and people have started feeling trauma because of isolation, because of alienation. Their daily routine life, their social activity has been affected by this, which have depressed the people of the town. So we can totally relate it with COVID-19, when people, when during the lockdown, people were quarantined. Still, people are trying to maintain a social distance or a personal difference among the people. The railways were shut off. Then the roadways, the airways, there was no means of commutation. So even people have started feeling alienated and isolated in at their own particular homes, and they have started feeling depressed. So all these things, through this play, we can we can correlate it with the present scenario, that how a pandemic has or can affect the life of the individual or the society. Then we also have Stephen King's The Stand, which is an apocalyptic novel published in 1978, and the plot is centered on the spread of influenza. It has been exposed that a biological weapon within the secret US Department of Defense laboratory was accidentally released, and approximately 99.4% of the population has died within a month, or they have been killed rather within a month. And the world was left with a handful of brave survivors. This is what people are saying, that what China has done. I don't know what's the reality is, but there is a notion about it that this COVID-19 is a result of a biological weapon. This is what we are reading as rumors in the newspaper. Then we also have another work by Edgar Allan Poe, that it's a short story entitled as The Mask of the Red Death, that was published in 1842. And it exposes the failure of the authorities to deal with the situation of a pandemic. That how the authorities fail to provide an assistance to the commoners, to the common people. And the story says that the Red Death causes people to bleed to death through their pores. And what the prince does is that the prince name is Prospero, and the prince called Prospero, he locks himself into the abbey, that is the palace. He locks himself up along with his 1,000 loyal courtiers into the abbey, and then he keeps a distance from the rest of the people. He does not cares about the commoners, and he throws a masquerade ball over there in the three rooms. And for some time it was okay, but finally death enters in form of a human guest, and first it takes the life of the Prince Prospero, and then it takes the life of the rest of the courtiers with whom he was locked up in the abbey. And there is one more work by Jack London, which is entitled as The Scarlet Plague. It is also a futuristic dystopic fiction, and it is also set in 2073, in which the protagonist James Howard Smith is talking to his grandsons, and he's telling them. He goes back into the flashback, and he is telling them about the epidemic, the pandemic, which has spread, which took place in 2013. It's an imaginary story in 2013, and he is telling the story that how he has faced a pandemic, and he emerged out as one of the survivors. And his grandchildren are not able to believe it that he has survived through a pandemic in 2013. Then, apart from these foreign writers, we have got some of the Indian writers who deals with the theme of pandemic, or there are references of pandemic in their works. So the first one is Surikant Tripathi Nirala, and Surikant Tripathi Nirala's memoir, though it was originally in Hindi, but an English translation was done in 2016, which was titled as A Life Misspent. And in this particular work, he captures the miseries of the Spanish flu during 1918. Um, in this particular work, he talks about that the Indian soldiers who were sent to England during the World War One to fight over there, when they returned back, they did not come alone. They became the barrier of this Spanish flu. And when they came to India, they brought that particular disease to India also, and it created a pandemic. And it was believed that this flu has killed around 10 to 20 million people in the world at that particular time. We have also another writer, poet, Shrikant Verma, who has written a poem called Bukhar Mein Kavita. The poem is in Hindi, and I'll recite some of the lines in Hindi. He has said, चेचक और हैजे से मरती हैं बस्तियां, चेचक और हैजे से मरती हैं बस्तियां, कैंसर से हस्तियां, वकील रक्तचाप से, कोई नहीं मरता अपने पाप से. So these words are highly ironical, and एक व्यंगात्मक कविता इन्होंने लिखी है, and this is highly ironical. So literature, it does not tell us how to fight with the pandemic, but it gives us a more important thing, and that is that it provides us with a source of consolation, showing common human concerns. Like, it makes us to feel sympathetic, it makes us to feel empathetic, and it makes us to learn from the previous wrongdoings which one has done, so that it could not be repeated in the future. So in a way, it gives it's a kind of a consolation. Then we come to Ahmad Ali's Twilight in Delhi, and this work is when Ahmad Ali describes a scene of grave digging. He tells something about grave diggers, and that is quite distressing. It is very painful. When you read it, it's a tragic. It tells about the grave situation during the pandemics, that regarding the burials, that he says that the grave diggers have raised their fees fourfold times. The grave diggers have raised their fees fourfold times during the pandemics, and they did not even bother whether the grave which they are digging is properly dug or deep enough or not, because they have so many more graves to dig, and Delhi has become the city of dead at that particular time. So we have also got Munshi Premchand, who has made references to pandemics in his works. In one of his stories called Eidgah, we have got a little boy called Hamid who lives alone with his grandmother. There is a reference to pandemic in that also, because um, Hamid's father has died because of cholera. And um, then there are some more works. There is one work by an Oriyan writer who writes in Odia, and the name is Fokir Mohan Senapati, and he has written a work called Rebati. And in Rebati, he has talked about the havoc that has been created by cholera during the time of the pandemic, how the life changes. So in the beginning, the story is like that. Rebati is a small girl who is desirous of studying, And she asks her father that she wanted to study in life. So her father arranges for a tutor whose name is Basu. And when Basu starts coming and start teaching her, and during the meanwhile, there has been outbreak of cholera, and the parents die because of cholera. Now Rebati is left uh, with her grandmother, and she gets dependent on Basu. But in the meanwhile, we also find that Basu has also come under the clutches of cholera, and he also dies. And soon after, Rebati also gets infected with this cholera and dies. So it is very painful and a tragic tale. I would also like to make reference to a quite recent work that was published in 2018 by Rajat Chaudhary, and the name of the book is The Butterfly Effect. And the setting is in various parts of Asia and Europe, and this also deals with a similar theme like Stephen King's The Stand, and it tells that it's because of some accidental release of a biotechnological mishap, an epidemic has been caused, and this book has been listed in 50 must-read books about the ecological disasters by the book Right US. So this is what all I want to tell you about the pandemic literature. But I also want to say that every coin has a two sides. So when we discuss about pandemic, though generally we discuss more about the destructive and the disastrous role which a pandemic plays in the society or in the life of the people. But on the other hand, even if it's a small portion, but there's a constructive side as well, which provides us a time for introspection, which gives us a time to develop a thought process and to rekindle and to produce any work of art or any work or a masterpiece. It also gives us certain time to devote to our family, to our own self, and to live positively even in the time of pandemics, as it is said that we are not living in fear but we are living in faith. And faith, it's the only hope sometimes. Hope is the only thing sometimes which keeps us going. And I would like to conclude with the lines of Emily Dickinson, in which she has said that hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tunes without the words and never stops at all. And if you have any questions, I'm there to answer them. So, as I've told you, that it has got both the positive and the negative side, that it creates a positive influence. Also, it's all upon thinking that how one thinks it, whether one takes it as a positive thing or as a negative thing, whether one just sees the destructive side or one is also interested in some constructive uh, side as well.
Thank
You
you so
don't?
much, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You want to continue?
No, yes, I have finished.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We came to see it in a series, starting right from the ancient text, from Chaucer to Shakespeare to Camus, and also Stephen King, Decameron. You mentioned, I think you mentioned all wherever we can have the mention of this word plague. And then when you took into reference the Indian writers, the Hindi writers, be it Premchand, be it Jaishankar Prasad. So it was really very illuminating. We came to know about so many various things. And you rightly pointed out at the end about this thing, hope, because out of the Pandora's box, when all the disease and death and everything came out,
Everything.
the last thing that left was hope. So that is the only thing with which we can continue on, because
We'll
obviously
continue.
we must have some source, some encouragement, and that can
Very
come
true.
from hope. So thank you so much, ma'am. And earlier I forgot to mention that ma'am has been awarded with Sanmati Young Talent Literary Award in 2016, and Angman Literary and Cultural Society had given that award. And recently she has been awarded with Shakti Award in writing category from Fever FM. So she has also 4 books to her name. So I'm so overwhelmed after listening to you, ma'am. And there are no
It was
questions as of yet. So I think that would be
it
all.
was my pleasure, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being
Most
with us and
welcome. Most welcome.
connecting to us. Thank you, ma'am. Now I would request, moving on to the, uh, we can say, the last part of our session today. And with this only we'll end up our webinar today. So I would now like to hand over to Lalit Prabha ma'am. Lalit Prabha ma'am is assistant professor and the joint convener of this webinar. She is assistant professor in English here. And now I hand over the screen. Screen is all yours, ma'am, for vote of thanks and a brief overview of whatever we have done in the 2 days of this webinar. Lalitma ma'am.
Thank you so much, Vinamta ma'am. Wishing all my viewers a very warm afternoon. So thankful to be here. And till now, we've had a very engaging session. Such enlightened speakers we've had, and such various topics they've touched and discussed in detail. Now, towards the end of the session, we are trying to wind up, and I'm here to present an overview of this 2 days webinar. First and foremost, since we are dealing with the literary perspective, I'd like to talk about how literature has been at the service of humanity. In today's complicated geopolitical scenario, the novel coronavirus has hit the world very hard. It is imperative to maintain unity in order to beat threats such as COVID-19 without thinking of borders and social evils such as corruption, greed, racism, and communalism. The disease does not seem to discriminate among its victims. Literature, in responding to epidemics, celebrates the enduring range of human responses to the gamut of feelings that rage against the onslaught of disease and death. A pandemic has devastated the planet. During this pandemic, a writer gets the opportunity to write chilling horror stories and a literary novel which is a dazzling portrait of modern civilization in all its wretched, shambling glory. Apocalyptic outbreaks of diseases have been a civilization in all, have been a recurring motif in literature since time immemorial. As we are facing a threat of a new virus that has reached pandemic proportions, we crawl under the covers with fictional and non-fictional accounts of epidemics that span across a multitude of eras and geographies. Literature has a vital role to play in framing our responses to the pandemic. Ranging from classics to contemporary novels, pandemic literature offers something in the way of an uncertain comfort and a guide for what happens next. The Decameron by Boccaccio in 1353, set during the Black Death, reveals the vital role of storytelling during the time of disaster. In the collection of novellas, storytelling functions as a method of discussing social structures and interaction during the earliest days of the Renaissance. The stories offer the listeners ways through which to restructure their normal everyday lives, which have been suspended due to the epidemic COVID-19 and is certain to shake up economic systems and entrenched institutional processes as we are seeing with the shift towards remote learning in universities around the world. Texts give us an opportunity to think how similar crises have been managed previously, as well as ideas about how we might structure our societies more equitably in their aftermath. Now, I would like to move on to the impacts of the pandemic on other fields before finally coming back to literature once again. Now, what has been the global impact? The COVID-19 pandemic has sent shockwaves across the entire world and has forced the world to adapt itself to some new rules and norms. On a physical level, these new rules and norms are easy to plan and strategize, but to put them to practice needs for deeper level of understanding, empathy, and patience for sure. The fabric of society is being stressed under stress levels unforeseen in the past. This kind of a desperate situation was never imagined in the past, given the advancements in medical science, technology, infrastructure, and policy makings that already the world had achieved through their intellectuals. Still, the hints of similar aftermaths of a global level apocalyptic scenario were being given by many thinkers and predicted by movie makers as predicted in many movies, such as already discussed at large by Dr. Soumya Sarkar, our first speaker. COVID-19 has not only put individuals under stress, but the whole societal system has been set out of balance. No government had ever thought of facing such diverse conditions which the present pandemic has presented. There were no guidelines, disaster management programs, no models, no response systems, in spite of the world having had some shock experiences previously, such as the SARS, etc. Clearly, the lessons were not learnt or taken seriously either. The glaring examples are the prevailing situations in European countries today, the USA and Russia. This has pitted countries against each other, with China at the center of the fiasco, no doubt, and our country is making desperate efforts. The country is making desperate efforts to divert the world's attention from its central role in the spread of COVID-19. That is China spreading COVID-19, thereby aggravating the situation furthermore and pushing the already battered economy to a more pathetic condition. These diversions have forced countries like India to be pulled into unintended wars, thus causing hate waves to be spread across the globe. Coming to the plight of the migrant workers. The whole wide world where we are facing the COVID-19 that started from China was unforeseeable. And so the migrant workers in India have really faced hardships. On a global overview, every individual was affected by lockdowns, but the migrant workers have been affected the worst. They have suffered the most. In India, lakhs of workers move to different states for a livelihood, where they do the work of skilled or semi-skilled laborers. Due to the complete lockdown, these people were faced with unemployment and financial crunch. Migrant workers were forced to walk hundreds of kilometers due to the sudden lapse of transportation facilities. Many lost their lives on their way, even before reaching their home to their loved ones. Some became so emaciated in the travel that they fell down and died, and there was no one to tend to them. Nothing can be more pathetic than this. We saw on news channels how the cycle girl carried her father 1,200 kilometers from Gurugram to her home in Darbhanga. Another highlighted news was about the woman who carried her child on the trolley bag for kilometers together without stopping or taking a look back. There was also the case of 16 migrant workers who lost their lives on the railway track. When transport facilities were halted by the government all of a sudden, these migrant workers became jobless and faced grave financial crisis. Many migrants met with accidents on their way, even victims of dehydration, starvation, exhaustion, etc. Still, there was some help. The government came up, some magnanimous people came up, generous people came up to help them reach their homes. Having a look at the psychological impact. The COVID-19 pandemic has rapidly evolved and changed our lives in an unprecedented manner. The sudden and drastic change from a daily routine of going to offices, schools, and colleges to being locked up in our homes in the blink of an eye has caused a change in the mental balance of the millennium. The prolonged stay at home, which has been termed lockdown, has led to widespread psychological stress around the globe. The feeling of helplessness during the pandemic has struck almost everyone. And to top it all, the anxiety of getting infected caused innumerable health issues, even leading to extreme situations such as mental relapses or cases of suicide or attempted cases of suicide. People were forced to adapt to the new normal, that was work from home, which came with brought with it adjoining complications of maintaining a high level of productivity, severe health issues due to long hours of sitting at your laptop or computer or your mobile phones, dealing with office and home with equal dexterity. As we all know, during this epidemiological and psychological crisis, the enormity of living in isolation, the changes in our daily lives, job losses leading to financial hardships, and the grief over the death of our loved ones has the potential to affect the mental well-being of many. The new normal under this situation comprises of general isolation and social distancing, wearing masks and frequently washing hands with soap or sanitizers. As we all know, that prevention is better than cure, and in the present scenario, when the number of masks and the testing tools is so limited, this is the only way to ensure our safety. Time and again, our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, has requested masks with folded hands to follow the guidelines of the Ayush Mantralaya, continue with the healthy habits of hand washing, wearing masks, and maintaining social distance so as to remain healthy. The flip side of social distancing is feeling isolated. While maintaining physical distance, it is imperative to maintain connection with our family, friends, relations, neighbors, etc., and to provide each other psychological and social support. It's important in this situation to know and recognize the signs of anxiety, pain attacks, depression, and suicidal tendencies, not just among our family, friends, and neighbors, but for our own selves too. During the state of anxiety, one feels restless, irritated, hopeless, depressed, and maybe sometimes angry with one and all. One is not able to pinpoint the problem. People feel difficulty in concentrating, suffer from sleeplessness or insomnia. Health problems and finances are great issues that cause anxiety. A great fear always lurks in the back of our minds that something bad is going to happen. Some people may undergo panic attacks like sweating, trembling, shortness of breath, or feeling of choking. People may exhibit signs of depression through their lack of interest and pleasure in daily activities. They may lose or gain weight significantly. Other symptoms, including insomnia, excessive sleeping due to lack of energy, or an inability to concentrate, are commonly noticed. There may be a recurrent thought of death or suicide sometimes, resulting in the actuality of the incidents. Only a perpetual positive attitude can help us overcome the diverse situation presented by this overwhelming pandemic. Along with this, strengthening our immunity, both mental and physical, can help us survive this pandemic. Coming to the technological impact. Some new technological terrains have been widely explored during the lockdown period. The impact of technology has left an indelible mark on every individual. The ways and means of imparting education has also changed, with teachers now taking online classes through networking apps like Google Meet, Zoom, WebEx, etc. Pre-recorded lectures on YouTube. The teaching and learning patterns are fast changing. We have been able to access erudite speakers from across the globe by attending online conferences and webinars. We can access digital libraries and online repositories to read books and scholarly articles as well. One can enroll into online courses provided by various platforms like Unacademy, etc., and get certifications too. The audiobooks are also available online, and for those who enjoy reading, the Kindle edition of books is also available. With more time in hand now, people can make efficient use of technology and use social media and search engines to hone their existing skills or to explore and develop new creating skills. Thankfully, over the last decade, technology has advanced to the point where many workers can stay fully productive working remotely. Video conferencing, technology, project management, software, and applications like Slack really close the space between people who must collaborate to get their work done. It is said that necessity is the mother of invention. Being open to exploring, testing, and refining the ways required to work together will help to ensure that frustrations are kept at a minimum. The current challenges that we are facing are undoubtedly creating a myriad of complications for many in the workforce. Work and life are being impacted in a variety of ways. During time like this, many are forced to develop new habits and routines to meet their responsibilities to their families and to their employers. The silver lining is it is during times like this that we find ourselves in a position to create new ways of working. We need to adapt to the current environment in ways that help us achieve our collective individual goals, despite the dynamic environmental conditions that we are finding ourselves in. The need of the hour is to take good care of ourselves and of each other and realize that this is a challenge as well as an opportunity to build new ways for a safe future. There are some new teaching techniques like audiobooks amidst pandemic COVID-19. With the sudden closure of schools amid the COVID-19 pandemic, districts around the country are scrambling to figure out how to keep millions of students engaged and in learning mode while they are at home. Challenges abound and vary widely from district to district, including equitable internet and device access, educator training, or a lack of digital materials and resources. Happily, educational companies as well as education and trade publishers are part of the all hands on deck response, quickly ramping up access to their existing digital resources and support, and also creating new ones to assist educators, parents, and students with distance learning. Coming to e-learning and fit classrooms. Now, we've seen a varied response from educational institutions to the lockdown. In general, only those with a solid educational practice with students who have access to connectivity and devices and with staff already trained in the use of online teaching have been able to maintain their activity with minimum disruption, while others, the vast majority, have simply done the best they can under emergency conditions, hoping to weather the storm. Classes that will continue as best they can, volunteerism, online teaching seem simply as a side dish. Students without access to computers or to internet connection, teachers who simply assign essays based on reading material, or measures such as a universal pass have become very sadly common. The problem we face from now on is clear. What initially looked like emergency measures no longer are. From now on, we must prepare for life in a world where a vaccine for COVID-19 is going to take a long time, which means a great many restrictions on how we used to do things. For a long time, classes will be at half capacity. Many students or teachers will be forced to self-confine, attendance will be irregular, and many methodologies we used before will no longer apply. The change will be permanent. Educational activity will no longer be face-to-face or online, but a blend, able to move from one to another immediately, fluidly, continually through a student's life, way beyond the school, college, or university years. In today's world, we are all required to continually learn and unlearn, and we will demand conceptual frameworks and tools for it. Institutions, academic directors, teachers, or students who are unable to adapt will simply have no place in this new scenario. I would also like to say that this new scenario involves many changes. Firstly, we need to resolve the so-called digital divide. We must understand that every person who intends to access education, which is considered as a universal right in many countries, must necessarily have access to a computer and an internet connection with reasonable bandwidth. This requirement will temporarily raise barriers to entry to education and will be something that both institutions and governments will have to take into account through scholarships, grants, loans, donations, etc. Secondly, this will mean that teachers must reconsider all their methodologies and prepare them for this new blended learning environment. This will not be an option, no matter how successful teachers might have been in the previous environment. They will need to understand that those days are gone and that they must now adapt to new standards. This requires openness toward being trained in the use of new tools, modifying their syllabuses, their evaluation methodologies, and understanding the role of each element in this new environment with new learning processes. Thirdly, institutions, both educational and normative, must understand that in this new context, some ways of teaching no longer make sense. In an online environment with access to unlimited information, the focus on memorizing meaning is replaced by the need to know how to select and use the information appropriate to each context. We will need to make transition from exam-based systems that encourage knowledge retention to others based on developing projects or tasks. This means the end of textbooks as a sole source of knowledge, along with sessions where a teacher recites a lesson and students take notes. Instead, flipped classroom methodologies where the student makes center stage in preparing material and the teacher devotes interaction time, online or face-to-face, to providing structure, explanations in greater depth, or answering questions. In addition, group work and participation will become fundamental elements of education as they represent the way students will transfer the knowledge they have acquired when they go out into the world. We will need to evaluate not only what a student knows or does not know, but how they use it to convince others, to argue their point within the group, to help the class progress, or to lead the discussion. Peer-to-peer evaluations will become the norm. Instead of relying on exams to grade students, we will now see complex systems made up of participation, coursework, projects, individual and group work, grades assigned by colleagues, and possibly several other criteria. What tools will be used to do this? There will be many and varied and constantly evolving tools. We will have to unlearn everything we thought we knew about education and above all, online education. MOOCs and systems in which knowledge is stored in a repository for the student to access at their own pace have only proven one thing, that between 90 and 95% of people do not complete them. If that's not a failure, I don't know what it will be. Online teaching will not consist of turning a handle while students learn on their own. On the contrary, it will require teachers to engage more than ever, who will spend many hours in forums moderating conversations and opening new threads. These forums will have the kind of advanced social capabilities we've already become familiar with, along with multiple analytical capabilities and other tools capable of making conversations better and deeper than those in a face-to-face environment, and with more opportunities for customization and adaptation to the characteristics of the student. But obviously, it won't be all forums. In addition, we will see, of course, video conferencing tools that enable enriching two-way interactions, shared whiteboards, instant messaging, content managers that we will use as repositories, virtual reality that offers immersive experiences, simulation, proctoring, games of various types, a panoply of functions that will constantly be evolving throughout the lifetime of students. In other words, online teaching will no longer simply be an option. Next year, institutions that are unable to offer a blended methodology that seamlessly integrates face-to-face and online teaching will increasingly find themselves left behind until they are simply out of the race. By next year, the emergency measures implemented by educational institutions over recent weeks will have to be fully integrated. Solutions capable of providing efficient, complete, and fulfilling learning experiences. A challenge for institutions, teachers, and students, but one that could add a whole new dimension to teaching, adapting it to a new context, more flexible, and above all, more logical in every way. With this, I've summarized all that we tried to portray during the 2 days of our webinar. And now I would like to thank our esteemed guests. The first speaker we had, Dr. Soumya Sarkar, who is an assistant professor in Nitishwar College, Muzaffarpur. And Sir had very well explained how the movie Contagion was a prediction about the COVID-19 situation that we are facing today. Sir has said in his discourse that though a number of movies have been made by the Hollywood film industry on pandemic, such as Outbreak, Carriers, Flu, what separates research on a deadly virus and its aftermath, as well as the depiction of societal behavior during a pandemic? So also talked about a few scientific terms in the film, and of course he explained them well, such as fomites, R naught, patient zero, contact tracing, viruses, zoonosis, contagious, quarantine, virus, vaccine, etc. The condition of pandemic is realistically portrayed in the movie, and Sir at length, explained it to us. The movie seems prophetic, and he started his discourse with the story of the Black Swan, which he later on went on to tell that the COVID-19 is actually a white swan. You went in detail, sir, to explain all the situations that were portrayed in the movie and how we can correlate that to the present day COVID conditions that we are facing. Thank you very much, sir, for such an enlightening lecture. It was really very engaging, and we are requesting you to spare your time again in future whenever we call you, request you. Thank you, sir, very much. Our next speaker, Dr. Priyam Francis, Assistant Professor English from MDDM College, Muzaffarpur, shared her views on the status quo in the pandemic. Ma'am has dealt with how the pandemic is treating the status quo on various fronts, be it in the global, national, or domestic level. The COVID-19 strain of the coronavirus family is not only a deadly virus to have threatened human beings in the recent years. The SARS, the Ebola, or the Nipah were dangerous in their own right. But the pandemic that the COVID-19 has engendered has outstripped many destructive world events and pandemics to take its place among one of the most damaging occurrences in human society. While still bound in the grip of the pathogen, the world, which seems to be almost on a halt for the past few months, has been trying to make sense of the travail visited upon us, and we, in our various ways, have tried to rationalize the situation. Despite the widespread lockdowns, our world is not completely static. We are interacting and projecting our thought processes onto the virtual sphere. We have virtual lives in a way which have become more active with the decrease in mobility. Our familial interactions and the curve of relationships will also possibly undergo modifications in this pandemic as we are forced to evaluate them. While the general public is sequestered in their homes, the political sphere, both domestic and global, has been equally busy. Ma'am has at length talked about how we are facing it at the national level, at the global level, how the governments are reacting to it, what are the problems faced by society, and still, at a large level, we still remain ignorant to very glaring issues. Coming to our last speaker, Dr. Rashmi Jain, who is an assistant professor, Department of English, Ishwar Sharan Degree College, University of Allahabad. We would like to say that, ma'am, it was a pleasure listening to you, and congratulations for all the awards that you've received, for the many books you've penned, and it was a great honor and, of course, a very big opportunity listening to you. Ma'am talked about literature, which has reflected about various pandemics through verse and prose, starting from Shakespeare, Decameron, Defoe, to Albert Camus and Stephen King. All have shown how various countries have been drastically affected by it, but many a times such pandemics have given birth to productive literature too. Apart from them, many Indian writers have exposed the effect of pandemic on human life through their works. Writers like Munshi Premchand, Tagore, Ahmed Ali, Amitabh Ghosh have reflected the same. At length, ma'am has described them in her lecture. Literature may not tell how to deal with pandemic, but it becomes a source of consolation for sharing common human concerns. Thanks a lot, ma'am, for this very, very good deliverance. We were really very enlightened by it. I would also like to thank all our viewers, our participants, for such a patient listening. We have gone beyond our time limit, but you've been there with us. We would also like to thank once again all our honored guests and speakers for the precious time that they have given us by being here with us in our webinar and sharing their valuable views and vision. I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to all the participants once again, my colleagues here with me present in the college. My special thanks once again to our principal, sir, without whose guidance and great support, this webinar would just not have been possible in the way it has been presented. Also, I would like to convey my special thanks to Vinamrita ma'am, the convener you have been seeing since yesterday, since morning yesterday, and again throughout the day today. She's really taken a lot of pains to make this webinar a success, as we've all seen it, by doing all the necessary requirements, fulfilling it, maybe working up late till night. Thank you, ma'am, personally and on behalf of the whole college. Thanks a lot to you. So with this, we come to the end of this two-day webinar. Thanks to one and all. We formally announce the end of this webinar. Please take care and stay safe, and make sure you make the best use of this lockdown period to materialize your dreams, just like yesterday Paul sir had said that his unfinished work since 1998, he gave them a finish there, completed 6 of his pending books and sent them for publication. Likewise, we could all try to live up our dreams now, complete the unfinished works, and due to the constraints of time, which we were unable to do in the busy schedule previously. So once again, best of luck, stay safe,